Morning, Bret.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. How are you?
Doing well.
Good. Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Austin now.
What?
Yeah.
So we're obviously based in the UK. What's the time there at the moment?
It is 10:30 in the morning. How about y'all?
We are 4:30 in peak winter of Britain, so it just gets dark basically from 3:30 onwards. It's a bit miserable this time of year. How about Austin?
It's raining today. We go from a second winter to a second spring to a separate fall. Like just every week, it sort of has a different flavor. So it
I
was
like
really
that.
hot, then cold.
It's good. Very good. For those who are joining us today, thank you. Leadership Unplugged, as returning listeners will know, and I'll give a brief overview for new listeners. The idea of Leadership Unplugged, and I've mentioned this to you, Bret, is we want to have a sort of organic conversation about some of the challenges that tech startups and scale-ups might be facing, in America and UK, Europe, what some of the differences are between those countries and how that makes a difference if you're the CTO or the CEO or the CFO, and how you scale and how you grow and how you be effective. And we were just talking before we started clicking record on some of those topics, which I'm sure we'll dive into. But today we've got Bret Siers, CEO of Training Layers. Good guy. Me and you have only had sort of one or two conversations, haven't we? So we're going into this quite blind, which is usually the exciting one. Let's see how we get on today, Bret. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for being on.
All right, thanks for having us. Having me. I'm excited about this. So
Good. Should we kick stuff off then? I normally ask for a little bit of a background on yourself, because a lot of people might not know who you are and they might have done a bit of research before listening to this episode. But what's your background? How did you sort of get to where you are now, and what's that journey look like?
Okay. Yeah. So it's sort of a normal and then not so normal. So I ran a professional services company for 25 years. We did basically retirement account distribution across the US. And at the beginning of this year, 2023, sold it. We'd moved. I was in Los Angeles for 30 years with my wife. We got 4 kids, and it was just time kids are at a place where we wanted to move to Austin, sort of restart. And so it was an opportunity to reimagine what the next phase of life was. And so sold that company. Sort of as the reason why Training Layers exists was I built a bunch of proprietary software. We built some relationship CRM and some administrative tools for our company to basically do everything that I did that helped us grow. And as its functionality increased, our usage of the systems decreased, which now that I've been working in B2B SaaS, it makes a lot of sense. But as someone who was using tools in this, it made no sense. I couldn't understand what was happening. So I jump on calls and be like, what's going on? And my team would be like, we just don't know how to do it. We don't know why it's important. They just couldn't get that user understanding. And so I do these little Zoom calls, and in 10 seconds, like, here's what this is, and here's what this is. And they would click. You could watch that light bulb go off. But I was doing 2, 3, 4 hours a day across the country on these calls. I'm like, okay, so like this isn't scaling. And I got frustrated. I'm like, I'm just going to record me and I'm going to put me in the app, and then I'm always there. And it was sort of this like emotional, frustrated, my hands are up, I just don't know what else to do. And in the next 60 days, our usability doubled and our productivity tripled. And I get on calls and they're like, why? And they're like, well, because we knew what to do. We could just like listen to you and do it, and listen to you and do it. And we could hear it over again. And that was one of those light bulb moments where I'm like, wait, and started looking at the market and talking to other CEOs. Well, how do you handle this? And they're like, we guess, right? We know that we're blowing money on spend, but there's just not a solution. And so Training Layers was born out of, wait, what if we could put in-app training directly where the user is so that they don't have to go search for it? It was that basic sort of idea that has built this company now. So it's sort of funny. So that's sort of where we now are in that part of the journey.
That's really interesting. So what, because you see this, don't you, in some like tech platforms, I use a handful doing the recruitment job, and they'll have the training sort of in a separate area within the application. So are you saying you've developed something that while I'm in the moment having the pain and wanting to throw my computer out the window, that it pops up going, here you go, there's what you need to do next?
Basically that simple. We looked at sort of the business. This is my third company, and each of them was, I sort of say this and I get in trouble when I say it, but like, say the current business model out loud. And if it just sounds silly, maybe you should build a business around it. So the business use case is we spend all of this time and money and software to get people to the exact moment where they can benefit from our software. They can benefit from our 10x value. And at that apex moment, they're at peak frustration and concern. We send them away from wherever that is to go figure out how to actually do it. Now, when you say that out loud, it sounds pretty silly. We're like, why don't we just provide that support directly there? And we can do it in these little micro videos, right? TikTok reminded us we can learn a lot in 11 seconds, right? We can be influenced. We don't need a 45-minute training on how to do 47 steps. We need to move from step 2 to step 3. And not just understand how to do it and how's really, really critical. But right, my background's in personality and social psychology, a lot of learning theory. Change is driven by context with content. Like we have to know why, right? And there's all this why selling, all the social selling and LinkedIn and all this is really starting to give people a picture as to why they want to make this change. But the moment we live in software, it's only how. And so if we can't find a way to actually reach the user and help them understand why this matters, they're ultimately going to go back to what worked, because it's the barrier to change is so high when we don't emotionally understand why we're going to what do we get out of it? And so a little 13-second video, right? I was talking to the founder friends. I'm like, man, if you're over my shoulder, I'm looking at your dashboard and I have no idea what this is. But if you're over my shoulder and you're like, oh, this is why we did this, and you have some enthusiasm, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Now I'll go study. Now I'll go learn. Now I believe that it's not just going to be a tool, but a strategic asset to have it mastered. And so that's really the value prop that I think we can bring in.
Yeah, it sounds it. You mentioned there that this is your third company, right?
Yeah.
What do you think, if anything, has changed over the timeline when it comes to, I guess, conceiving an idea, then conceptualizing that, and then scaling and building something?
Well, it's funny. Is my first two, one was, as I said, the financial services, one was coaching. So those are professional services. Probably the hardest thing for me this year has been this transition from some version of professional services to a product company that has to be scalable. Because in professional services, a lot of times the product you're selling is baked. It's done. You're not, but it's done, right? I'd have new people that just passed their investment licenses and they could go pick up an investment tomorrow from their cousin or their uncle or their best friend, because they had no idea what they were doing, but they knew that it was going into a place that was structured in that. And so, but in SaaS, right, the product is always changing, but you have to be on point quickly, right? So your ability to speak the language and understand what the metrics are, right, in order to be taken seriously and to know where things are, the expectation is just high. And so this year has been a lot about learning. So on one end, how is it different? I've had to go, what can I use that I know in this, and what do I have to let go because it's not actually a predictor of? And so that's probably been, for me, one of the biggest challenges to what this year has been.
How have you managed the tech and the software side then, moving into that space?
So one, I always laugh going, I've been the builder, the buyer, the champion, and the seller, and the user, right? So I know each of the personas that we're supposed to get. I found an amazing partner in CTO that is like unbelievable. And it's funny, there was a thing going around LinkedIn last week where it's like, the mark of the best mark of a phenomenal CEO is the ability to recruit an amazing CTO. So I sent that to my CTO and I'm like, hey, just want to let you know, right? This is why I am a great CEO, because of you, right? It's just one of those things. So he's going to make me look really, really good. But yeah, finding a teammate, and especially on the tech side, has been such a game changer for us.
Do you spend time then trying to understand that, or being involved in certain areas where you're not the expert, or do you just give up that control completely and go, you know what, you've got this?
Give up control, probably not. I'm no longer on our Scrum meetings. I'm no longer this, but I read them and I review them. Right, on all our Slack channels, I'll make sort of comments every once in a while. I'll pop in. ChatGPT has been one of the biggest breakthroughs on that for me, because I could actually take a conversation, right? It's transcribed, feed it into ChatGPT and be like, okay, here's your persona. You're a non-technical founder, right? Here's what you're trying to get done. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here was the call that was going on. Here's the solution. Tell me what questions I can ask. And I could actually turn ChatGPT into my CTO transcriber of value. So I can go back to him and go, now what about these 3 points? And so it actually allowed us to have, I like to think I'm pretty good at strategy, but when I was handicapped on the technical side. ChatGPT allowed me to put my strategic hat back on to start thinking about workarounds or ideas in an area that I'm not an expert at, but because of that language tool. So that's been a really big help this year. I don't know what I'd have done without that.
Do you find there's a challenge between having to communicate with the technical people and then also having to communicate with your customers and what they want, and then also having to communicate with, VCs and how you're raising money, and how those different areas separate and different personas and how you present yourself and how you communicate?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting thing. I was laughing. I did a post a couple days ago. I did a pitch event on Monday and just screwed the pooch. It was terrible. It was a minute and a half, and I was prepared and I just lost it. And the good news is I walked out and the CEO came up and was like, hey, that was bad, but you have a product I think we need. So we booked a demo. So I got a good thing out of it. But yeah, trying to talk to the team, right? Trying to build a team, right? We've got a team of 20 across the world that we really want them engaged in where we're going. So motivation and deadlines, right? That's an interesting scenario. But then trying to figure out the customer and where those conversations, all the stakeholders in that. And then there are 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to tell our story based on how the audience is listening. And recognizing that was one of the key things that we could be like, okay, is this the conversation that's going to hit what they care about? And when I can keep their North Star in my head, it allows me to sort of position it. But every once in a while, you just have the wrong conversation or 9 different things going on in your head. And you're like, wait, what was I saying? And then you just have to sort of, screw that one up. What's next?
Well, let's explore this in a bit more detail, because I think in terms of listeners who will be listening to this episode, there might be other leaders in similar positions to yourself, or people 2 or 3 steps down looking to get into leadership positions and wanting to understand, what that really looks like, not just when you sell the company and retire on a yacht, but how the challenge of moving from point A to B to C to D is really difficult, how it can be lonely at the top, how you need to manage and understand and constantly learn these new things. So how have you've accepted that and seen that as a challenge very recently? Yep. What do you do to conquer that challenge as best as you can? Well, what are the actual tangible steps that somebody could take away and go, right, I'm going to apply that because that sounds good?
I think there's probably three things I'll think about. And I'll start from the software side because it sort of understands. One, I realized I had to finally come to a grip that no one cares about our software. No one cares about anyone's software. They care about the job that they have to do. They care about their raise. They care about their promotion. They care about their kids' college funds. They care about the job they've got to get done. And so they want the single best tool to help them accomplish what they want. And so when I can remember that I'm just not that important, my software is just not that important, outside of helping them execute and facilitate what they want, that allows me to position those conversations. On our team, right, it's sort of dual side. One, they got a job, they want a paycheck, they want us to be successful. But they also, I will tell them after a good, customer call or VC calls, I'm like, I keep reminding them probably every week I want you to know the world's going to see this. The work you're doing is going to show up and the world's going to judge it. The world's going to see it. They're going to play with it. I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure that the world knows the work that you did. Because I think sometimes being a part of something bigger, knowing that it's not wasted, is really, really important. And there have been times that we had to throw some work away, right? We're like, hey, we had to pivot. And that can be emotional for, on the developer side or on the marketing side. They're like, man, we worked really hard to get this and we just sort of threw it in the trash. And for us, we're like, no, we didn't. We needed that to learn in order to iterate to where we're going. It's part of our DNA now. And so even if, the world doesn't see that piece, it's because of that piece that the world's going to see the next round of our works. And so we getting them. And then, and the venture side is always an interesting one, right? But understanding the game that they're playing, right? We sort of, if you're trying to raise or putting yourself in that position, it sort of can feel binary. Like it's us versus them. And the reality is that the best ones are partnerships, right? It's not transactional where it's like, hey, I'm going to buy this car from this person and I'm trying to get the very best price from that person I can. And they're trying to sell this car and they're trying to and there's ultimately a winner or a loser. But if I buy that car and I drive off, that relationship's over. That's not the venture relationship. The venture is, they want to get the best deal for their LPs and their growth. And we want the best deal for our company. But at the end of the day, this is a relationship over the next 10 years. And so how do we look at it as a strategic partnership? What is it? What are the boxes that they need checked to de-risk so that they can come in and be excited about this and give us the latitude to grow? And what do we need to be able to communicate so that they know who we are and where our North Stars are so that they're not out of alignment with expectations? And so each one of those channels, we're like, okay, what do they care about? What's their North Star? And how can we communicate to that? Not how can I get someone to hear what I want to say? That's probably the way we work.
On the VC front there, I think lots of people want, or they have an ideology, don't they, in any sort of relationship that they want a sort of partnership rather than a transactional relationship with customers, with their teams, with third-party suppliers, etc. Is that something that you move towards with the VCs? Like, do you hit them in a very transactional way, knowing that what you're trying to do is get to a conversation where you can at least speak to somebody to then talk about the actual bigger picture and your North Stars and partnering together? It's great to say that, and I always think that, but it's how do you get to that point where the VC is willing to even have a conversation with you about a partnership when the door's getting knocked 500 times a day about a million other new AI products coming out on the market? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's one of those that's easier said than done. One, I think one of the areas I wish I would have done better at, but we figured it out earlier than I guess later, is know your timelines, right? The old school adage of if you ask for money, you're going to get advice. If you ask for advice, you're going to get money. If you know you're going to raise in the next year, start the relationships now, right? That's what, a lot of founders are like, I just don't have time for it. Our message isn't there. They know the game too. Like, if you've got here I go is I'm like, if we have a good company, if we've got the right team, we sort of look at it as, is the market right? Is the idea right? Is the team right? And is the product right? Right? Those sort of quadrants early on. And you're like, okay, can I quantify the value of the market? If it's a quantifiable market that has an identifiable problem and our idea is a legitimate solution, that should resonate. If it doesn't, it's not one of two things. Either you haven't articulated it well or it's not the right partner. So you can start cultivating those relationships early if you're just refining the market and the idea. if you bring the team together, right? And then you start building your team. And you're like, what are your competitive advantages? And so start earlier with knowing that. In my old business, I would, it's always about, strategic partnerships. And I always laugh, and I've been saying this for 1,000 years, is you watch these movies and, and they're always this phrase of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And the person in the movie that's saying that is usually mad because they missed an opportunity, because someone got an advantage because of relationship. And that's sort of the crux of that movie. What I've never heard anyone say is, shoot, I don't have those relationships. I'm going to spend the next 2 to 3 years making sure that I'm in the right places, I meet the right people, I increase the right skills, so that the next opportunity presents itself, I'm in the right place at the right time with the right relationships. Like, that is a net outcome if it's a net objective. And so we all want that immediacy of, well, I need it now and it's not fair because I can't have it, versus, oh, I don't have it. I'm going to build a plan over the next amount of months, amount of years to make sure I got it.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? How have you found the VC landscape generally? Because I mean, we operated in this space a fair bit previously, but a couple of years back when it was growth at all costs, and then it sort of, the dialogue completely flipped, didn't it, into profitability at all costs, and it's been very turbulent. How have you found that now? Do you think that's settling down a bit more? Do you think we're at a proper value point with it and things are being evaluated correctly or not?
I don't know. I'm very far from the expert at this. We're in the beginning processes of sort of the next phase of those conversations. I think that it's an interesting thing. Everyone's talking about the fact that it's a VC market, right? It's an old school buyer's market where the terms are being set. Do I think that we're going to get the terms? We're in our seed round now. Do I think we're going to get the terms that we would have gotten 2 years ago? Probably not. Do I think that that's going to kill us? No. I think that 7 years from now, there's going to be a cycle. Ideally, in the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, there's an opportunity for liquidity, and we're going to be in a very different market. And so, right, you raise in good times, you sell in bad. You raise in bad times, you sell in good. Like, it's sort of build a good company and find the right partner within that. Now, I do think that everything's AI, so you've got a position. I think there's a balancing act between being too much of the story of the month, because I think people are looking for the contrarian play, and so too much positioning in AI, but I don't think it cannot be any, right? And so it's just sort of that balance. And it's like anything else, right? You just need to find the 1 or 2 or 3. You don't need the 400.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think much? I mean, of course, you look into the future, but there's different schools of thought with this. You mentioned you're at seed round now, or that stage of the company growth. How much are you thinking sort of 3 years ahead, or how much do you go, there's no point in even thinking 3 years ahead? What I need to be thinking is 6 months ahead, and how do you manage that timeline and sort of plan for what's coming next?
So, and this is just the way I've done this for years. I have no idea if this is good or bad or the right or wrong. And so take what I'm going to say for.
Well, it's worked so far. So.
Right. But I think of it as, if I don't have a 10-year plan, if I don't have an idea of a 10-year plan, I don't have a North Star. Right. So I have to know, here's where I think we can get to. Here are the things we're going to need to be able to make that a reality. Now, at the same time, I have to be hyper focused on the executable plan that's in front of us, because it gets us to that next step, right? So we've got to level up from where we are to the next. Now I got to know what direction that's going to be, because if it's north, I should be walking north. If it's north, I shouldn't be walking south. Like, that's the important part of my 10-year and my 3-year. But if we're going to play the venture game, we have to understand it. We have to understand that the goal of a seed investor is the A, right? The goal of the A is the B, right? They've got to be able to go to their LPs. They've got to be able to say, here's the growth, here's the process. And so we are raising our seed, understanding the benchmark milestones that we want at an A, so that we can walk in at an A and a strong A and go, here are the boxes, here's what we did. The seed's about experimentation. right? It really is about, hey, here are the 3 ideas that we got. Here's the one that we really, really know. We're going to go after that. We're going to test these other 2 because at the A, we get to that A, we'll double down and grow, right? And so getting as clear of that sort of structure has helped.
How do you think over the last 10 to 20 years, you've been involved with customers, teammates, all those third-party suppliers, everything. How much of an impact do you think a change in people and generations and what incentivizes people and what drives people and how it feels, at least to me, that people now care more about happiness and well-being and all those good things compared to maybe what it was like before? Maybe they did previously and they just never talked about it and it wasn't an open discussion point. So how has that impacted you across all the different facets of your business, or do you think it's something that's blown out of proportion?
Yeah, so I might get in trouble with a couple of things I say here, but it's all sort of fun. I liken back to, and this is anecdotal and might be accurate, but it's my interpretation of this is like in the early .coms with the Googles and stuff like this, right? There was like the Google campus had all of the things where no one would leave, right? They had the pool, the ping pong tables and the games and the dry cleaners. They had all these things that like 20-year-olds really, really craved and wanted. And it was like, this is the greatest experience. And then in the, 15 years later, they now have like daycare and like on-site schools and stuff because you sort of solve for where you are in the phase of your life, right? And so if Google, would have come out with daycares at the first day of their campus, that would have been misaligned with where the arc of the company was and the people that they were attracting. And so on one end, generations are generations and people are people, and we can only see the world through the lens that we have, right? And I've done some background in psychology and some research, and there was this premise of research is me search. I'm going to do the things I'm going to study the things that I care about. So sort of in that. Now, that being said, the world's different. We laugh that the youngest baby boomer is 58 years old right now, and the oldest Gen Zer is 26. So if we think about 7 years from now, what does that mean? 7 years from now, the 58-year-old is going to be 65 and retired, which means the entire generation that built corporate America with software as the main structure will be completely out of the workplace. And the group of people that have been digitally natives their entire life, they were 7 and 8 years old when an iPhone came out. They only understand personalization and curation, right? The premise of if it's important, it shows up on my feed. If it's important, it shows up as a notification. That entire group in the next 7 years will start walking into the business landscape as decision makers. And so when you think about software itself, like the fundamental shift of what that's going to do. What is the future of work, right? This, remote only versus, do you have to work in a place? And we can talk about sort of that because I think, there's a lot, PLG versus sales led, right? There's a lot of these different sort of structures that become binary on one's good or one's bad, one's right or one's wrong. And I always tell people, I learned a long time ago, the answer is usually in the opposite pole. Right. And so you might want to understand that space. But if we don't prepare for a group of people that generally, and look, all of us are different because of technology, right? This thing, right? We can go do anything from anywhere. That is the greatest gift in the world and one of the biggest curses because everyone who sends you an email knows that you got it. Right? You got it on your watch, you got it on there, like you got it. Mm-hmm. You can't do the, I didn't get the message thing, right? The expectation is prompt, the expectation is answer, the expectation is personalization. That shifts the outcomes a lot as well. And so this is we could talk, and I'll answer, we can talk about this a lot, right? In terms of this, because I think it's going to turn into the decision makings that we've got, how we position it, why our company is doing what we're doing, right? Where I think the old Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck's going to go. Like we're making a huge bet on this premise of personalization and curation and the opportunity of, like, the days of sitting in a big B2B SaaS software, to bring it home to us for a second, but to sort of tell why this matters and be like, I just don't know how to do it. And having a supervisor say, just figure it out, right? Those days are numbered, because that's not there. The ability to ask Bob or Carol, hey, can you come help me, when they're sitting in another house or they're sitting somewhere else, Bob and Carol aren't over your shoulder being like, hey, here's where this works. And we've talked to 1,000 people and they're like, we don't want to put in Slack, hey, I don't know how to run this workflow because my job requires me to run this workflow. I can ask Carol, I can ask Bob, but I can't put it on Slack because that's going to come back, right, at my review. There's now AI bots that are reviewing the Slack notes and then picking out, hey, here's what's good, here's what's bad, here's the warnings. That stuff's going to end up in reviews. And so it becomes this like stress point. And so solving that becomes not just a software issue, but a productivity, a feeling, right? This premise of tech shame, where these younger people are like, hey, you're so comfortable with tech, you should be great at it. Well, yeah, if you spend any time in B2B SaaS at scale, it's impossible to be great at it because it's multi-staged. There's multiple steps. It can't be intuitive. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what it's even supposed to do.
This is a huge topic, and I think it's worth exploring. You can immediately see how your product fits into that. I think what's interesting in this space is that many people and especially older generations will, and this has happened historically over time as well, will always push against that new and live in a world of inertia almost and don't want to change, etc. Whereas it sounds like you're going, that's a fool's game, because at some point there's going to be none of that, and it's going to be all of this, a younger generation who all think this other way to you. So what you're actually trying to do is not necessarily capitalize on it, but recognize it and go, so how do we operate best for those people, and think about what their mindset is going to be like. And it probably sits in a world of instant gratification and immediate curated content, like you're saying. Is that like how you probably came to this decision with training layers from a top level perspective?
On one level, and we started, it was, a handful of years ago, this COVID shift, like this people were leaving jobs. If you just think about, and it's mind-numbing to think about the institutional knowledge loss over the last 5 years and now over the next 7. All of this wealth of knowledge that these managers and these executives and these professional sales and marketers that have done this, that have left jobs, that are no longer in the workplace, and they spent, it takes scar tissue to really learn. Right? We learn. I love to think that we can learn by watching. We can learn by reading. We can learn by instructions. Most of us learn that a stove is hot by touching it. Right? Most of us learn through some pains, and the lessons we were told reinforce what we've experienced as that. So it's not that the stories and the coaching and the teaching is invaluable, but for it to connect to the emotional side, we got to experience it. That information is going to be gone. And so one of the real things, one of the big long-term drivers for training layers is, what if we can capture that institutional knowledge and then deploy it inside the softwares, right? So I'll sort of give a laydown in terms of this, right? We start with the software companies. We're like, okay, we got to help with onboarding. We've got to help with engagement. We got to help with feature adoption, right? You got to reduce your churn, increase your seat expansion. We've got to help your users know it. Where the real fun kicks in is we then will turn on, and this will be Q2 of next year, the enterprise layer. And imagine going to a company that says, why don't you put your training on how you train your salespeople, your marketers, your admins, your whatever, inside the software that they're using at the way they're doing it, and actually talk to them there. And let's take all this institutional knowledge that's sitting over in knowledge bases or in blogs that no one's reading and it's just going to be like aged. And let's take it and deploy it where the people that need to use it can receive it, apply it, see the benefit of it, and now consume it even more because they see how it's going to affect them. And so this generational shift of, these digital native people are going to need this personalization. Curation was one arm of it. And how can we retain all of this wealth of knowledge and wisdom over here and not have it disappear, and then bring them together with this layer of training that sits on any software that can deploy in that app and then ultimately across the stack.
Now the name makes sense, eh? I just got it. It just clicked. I like that. How do you think this affects then outside of training layers? And if we were looking at people generally, staff, recruitment and how we're going to grow companies and scale companies, how does that change now in terms of how you interview people and how you drive people and fulfill their desires and make them feel fulfilled while also gleaning productivity from them without people taking the P,
Yeah. Well, I love, like, I'm a diehard capitalist. Like, I love unfair competitive advantages, which sounds really strange as a startup because we're going to go up against some big things, but it's just time, right? Time is the equalizer. If you can strategize and plan, you can get really, really good, and you can define your unfair competitive advantage. And so if you're really good with people, that is an unfair competitive advantage if you're going against an organization that just treats them like numbers. And so can you get caught, right? What are the skills that you and I can develop, nurture, grow that give us an unfair competitive advantage? And then we can keep expanding those advantages. We can keep growing and getting better. And so when we think about the world, how does that affect it? If you treat people like numbers, they're going to act like numbers. If you treat people like, I was talking to a buddy here that is like the model partnership guy, like just phenomenal. And he's now just launching a company. And I've watched this and I was like, man, we have to recruit great people knowing that in today's world, they're probably going to leave. Versus we're going to attract great people and try to hold on to them. Right. So we think about, when I talk to folks, I'm like, look, our job is like, I want this to be a landing zone, but it's probably going to be a stepping stone. And so we're going to leave you better than we found you. What can we do to help you grow? What can we do to help you get better? What classes, what online, what resources, what can we do? Tell me what you're interested in and let's help feed you and let's help grow. Because holding back water is a waste of time. But if we can actually help people grow and get better, one, we get all those values, right, while they're getting better, which means that. And two, when they leave, we get a great reputation, right? My big thing is I'm like, look, when you go off on your own, you change the world. When you're on a podcast, when you're talking to someone, when you're interviewing, they're like, tell us your story. You're like, man, I learned so much from being a part of this, because that is one of the greatest long-term recruiting methodologies and messages we can do is my life's better when I'm around that group of people. They're going to leave me better. They're going to leave me stronger. And so it's aligned expectations. If my job is to keep you small so you never leave, that doesn't help any of us. If my job is to help you grow, yeah, that'll suck when you leave because I invested time, money, and energy and I lost your skill. But that means we got really great from whoever you are and you're ready to go level up.
How do you, I see this conversation come up more since probably COVID, I think, has been an accelerator of people talking about remote working and well-being, etc. How do you manage trust in that scenario?
Yeah. So I sort of start, and again, this remote versus, and we're struggling with it, right? We're a remote only company right now, only because we're not paying for an office, right? And we can go do this, but we struggle with this a lot. And I think we'll have an office and remote options and stuff like that. Trust is one. Slack is a big thing, right? Trying to create engagement and stuff like that. And identify metrics and measure outcomes and then test against it and check back, and ask, and stuff like that. So there is a bit more emotional management. And what we found is with newer people, because we haven't done sort of, right, we learned learned a long time ago, hire slow, fire fast, right? Go through the process, make sure you do everything you can to find the right fit. If they're not the right fit, don't hold on to them, right? Say, look, this isn't the right fit, good or bad. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. But newer folks their job is to test the boundaries of what can I get away with. That's just their job. Same thing with our kids, right? Our kids' jobs are to push the boundaries. Our job isn't to tell them not to, it's to have them understand consequences. People are the same way. So we try to help them see the bigger vision. We try to help them see this. And we know that some are going to exploit it and take advantage of it. And so you set up little opportunities and hopefully we can coach them out of it. And if we can't, we have to understand that this isn't the right fit, right? We need pirates and dreamers right now, not middle managers, right? We're a startup. We need folks that are like, oh, one more thing on this project, and then we'll reward them and make sure that. On the flip side of this, I think that it'd be interesting, the social scientist part of me, 5 years and 10 years from now on the professional services side specifically, and I'm saying this to anyone who's really, really has a zealot feeling about this remote only experience, understand the cost of it, because there is a cost to it. And the cost is you miss the pickup conversations. You miss getting pulled into the office because there's a partner, there's an executive that's working on a project, and you happen to be walking down the hallway and they pull you in, and now you're a junior on a project you literally have no business being on except proximity. And because you had that, you end up asking these 3 extra questions, or you end up learning this, and you end up creating yourself on a partner track or on a different experience because of those things. And I don't think that is talked about enough. I don't think that particular example is weighted enough in the remote only experience. I'm not saying remote is not good. I'm not saying that good people shouldn't have autonomy. And I don't know if the 3 days a week thing works, because that sort of feels forced. I don't know what the answer is, but here's what I do know. I don't send out a, all hands on Slack going, hey, does anyone who might possibly have these skills possibly want to be involved in this really collaborative conversation that I have no business telling you about, but I'm stuck and I have a whiteboard and I just need someone to bounce it off of. Is anyone interested? Like, that's not an all hands email that's going to go out. And so those conversations aren't happening.
You sound like somebody, and there's been a couple of examples in this conversation that puts weight on putting yourself into what others might say is lucky positions, but actually it's because you've been putting yourself into opportunistic positions by constantly thinking about your network and who you know, and not just trying to get an immediate gain from it, but understanding that that's something that you build over time, and potentially being in an office in the right place at the right time. The more you do those things, the more lucky somebody ends up being, and good things spin out of all of those things. I'm not saying you don't think the other side of that either. Do you think there's a balance there? It's hard to know, isn't it? Because it's very hard to quantify as well. Like that example you've just given is difficult to quantify other than experiencing it and knowing it. Like you and I might be able to say, yeah, I can think of examples like that in my own life, but it's hard to quantify that moving forward when it hasn't happened yet for somebody more junior,
Yeah, it is. I mean, one, I've never been the smartest. I've never been the fastest. I've never been the prettiest in any room. And so you're like, how do I stay relevant, right? I can show up early. I can go home late. And people ask me, what is my superpower? My ability to absorb pain. And so like, if I believe I can control my destiny by positioning and being able to learn and study and practice, I don't care how bad I look. Like, I'm just going to get better, because I'm never I won't come off the field. There really is something about the willingness to just not leave the field. And I don't know, not everyone has to do that. There are people that are really, really good. They're really smart. They've got all these advantages and take advantage, right? Again, I started this by unfair competitive advantages. Figure out if you're on a path, whoever's listening, and you're like, oh, but you should be able to quantify it. You should be able to be like, hey, here is my competitive advantage. I can do X. Great. Make sure the world knows you can do X, and make sure that it's a competitive advantage that people will pay for and will help you grow in whatever it is you want. And if it is, double, triple, quadruple down. if it's your ability to snap your fingers, like you're really good at it, that's hard to monetize. And so we're people. And I always go back to this, but like at the end of the day, companies don't buy software, they don't buy products, people do, right? People want to feel heard. People care about themselves way more than they care about you. And so if we can help, like that is a fundamental truth. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't know if there's fundamental truth. Everyone listening gets to settle that. Do you believe that that's a fundamental truth? If you believe that that's a fundamental truth, then that can be a driver in your decisions. Help people get what they want. If you help people get what they want, you'll never have to worry about thinking about you. It'll all work. Just sort of does.
I like that. How much of that I'm going to catchphrase it as almost an entrepreneurial spirit, and it's sometimes that is intangible, but it's usually identifiable. Like it you can feel it in just the way you talk and the way you are, the conversations you and I have had previously. Do you think that I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying that's a brilliant thing to have or a bad thing to have. It's just some people have it, don't they? Do you think that's important and is something that you either just have, or do you think that is a learned skill that you could learn to become an entrepreneur and learn how to stay on the field and all of that? Or is it just something in you that goes, I am this type of person, and like I said, I've got to double down on it?
So you'll have to stop me on how long you want me to talk about this. But for those of you that haven't, have you ever heard of Napoleon Hill?
No.
Okay. So I genuinely believe that anyone in business should read this book called Think and Grow Rich. It was written in 1905. And I'll tell my 30-second story of Napoleon Hill because it absolutely gets to this. Andrew Carnegie in the early 1900s was equivalent to a billionaire, right? Think about that right there. And he commissioned a young guy just in college named Napoleon Hill and says, for 30 years, I'm going to introduce you to the greatest, business and successful people. I'm not going to pay you, but we're going to give you resources. And I want you to write, ultimately, the science of personal achievement. And so Napoleon Hill, like any book, any self-improvement book, any of the gurus that you run right now, only the self-development, like the genesis from a self-development standpoint came from Napoleon Hill. The ultimate premise of it is, if I drop this, it'll drop at 10 meters per second squared. There's laws of gravity. We accept them. We understand them. Little kids, babies accept the law of gravity, even though they don't understand it. They walk, they fall. They know that stinks. As we get older, things we don't understand, we believe must not be true. Discernment kicks in. There are laws to success. You can study them, you can watch them, you can understand them. This book is phenomenal. It'll open up your brain in terms of this, but you can start to recognize them. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. Well, what does that actually mean? That means when something goes bad and it's an event, how you respond to that is a second event. What most of us do is we can join those two things. Here's what happened, here's how I responded, that was one event. It's not, it's actually two. Here's what happened. That is a moment in time. How I respond. If I get mad, what if I get really mad at a situation because I'm upset, but my greatest recruit comes walking past me, the person I've been talking about for the last 5 years, but I'm in such a bad place, I don't get that conversation. Was I unlucky, or was I not in a position to respond to it? Couldn't I have looked at that person and be like, oh my gosh, this just happened? But how we think about things matter. So for me, I've studied and trained and I've trained over 3,000 people on being an entrepreneur. And it really starts with, right, letting your mind see what's there and then making decisions on where you want to go, not where you are. That's my little commercial on that, because yeah, I think it's learned.
And it still feeds, in my opinion, that still feeds into that narrative of being opportunistic, being positive, being optimistic, right place, right time, but consciously making decisions to put yourself in more of those positions to create your own luck. I love that.
And the reason is when you start paying attention, what I have found is when I look for the opportunity, I have a tendency to see it. And so this isn't a Pollyanna, oh, I'm just going to go over and hope and pray that everything works out. It's really hard to stay focused and positive when things go shit. Like I screwed up on Monday. It was bad. Like it was the worst I've done. It really easily could have had me be in a bad mood. Like I was embarrassed. It was bad. in that moment, if this gentleman walks up to me and I'm in a bad mood and I'm short or embarrassed to him, I don't even know that there's an opportunity. But because I'm like, that wasn't, he's like, well, and now we got into a conversation and I wasn't living in my failure, but I was living in my opportunity. I could be who I needed to be in that moment. And so this isn't theoretical and this isn't just positive. This is a trait. Now, it's taken years of study and practice and all that stuff to be able to do that. But I don't know what that's going to turn into. Maybe it turns into a new customer. Maybe it's one of our biggest accounts. Who knows what that is? But I know that if I let how I felt in that moment affect how I approach that conversation, that conversation doesn't turn into an opportunity for me. And then I'm just like, oh, it was a bad night.
Did you think some of this thinking has come from your background in studying human behavior and psychology, did you say?
Yeah. Yeah, and just studying people and running into every wall imaginable and being like, okay, that sucked. What can I do to not do that again?
Love it. I think it's brilliant. We're rapidly running out of time, unfortunately, Bret. But I think we've absolutely got some pearls of wisdom from that. That last bit in particular was a nice wrap up of the conversations that we've just been having. That was really good. We may need a part 2, I think, to deep dive into some other areas. What's your thoughts?
Anytime, and this was fun.
Yeah, it was good fun. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, just excited. We're getting ready for our commercial release for Training Layers in January. We're excited. The traction's phenomenal. We're really excited about the story and the conversation. For the last little piece of this is a lot of times people get caught up with the word training, and they're like, oh, this is ed tech. We're a productivity tool disguised as training, right? It gives us the ability to say we need to be able to move the needle for people and help them tell the stories at the moment they've got. So if anyone's, they've got software and their users just don't understand why it's important and they're not moving through that, we're always looking to help and anything we can do. Yeah,
really good. There'll be links for the listeners wherever you're watching or listening to this. There'll be links to my LinkedIn, your LinkedIn, Bret, the company pages, if you need help with what you guys are doing, recruitment, tech conversations, everything we've discussed today. I'm sure either of us are open to continue this dialogue and explore some of those things. I've made a note of that book. That's gonna be my Christmas purchase, I think.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, sounds very good. But an absolute pleasure, Bret. I'll leave you crack on. Let's look at maybe doing part 2 in the new year. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bret. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Bye for now.